Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about 3 words that cause people difficulty because English language explanations of them don't really completely work, and the reason is because these words use different expression strategies from the ones that English uses and cover different areas of the meaning spectrum from any English equivalent. So English equivalents don't really explain what these words actually do. And before I go into this, I'd just like to say that if you have words that you're coming across in your immersion that are really stopping you dead, you don't know what they mean, I'd like you to put them in the comments below, because I want to cover some of the words that cause confusion in future videos, and it's very useful to me to know what it is that's causing people confusion. Alright, so the 3 words we're going to look at, they're all nouns. Tsumori, hazu, and beki. As we know, nearly everything in Japanese that isn't either a verb or an adjective is a noun or a noun-like entity. There are 1 or 2 exceptions, very few. By a noun-like entity, I mean something that structurally works like a noun. It will take logical particles or it will take the copula, etc., and generally act as a noun acts. So let's look at the first one. The first one is tsumori, and the way it's explained reminds me of amari, because with amari and tsumori, one particular range of its meaning spectrum tends to get explained, but not the rest of it. So with amari, people get surprised when they see it used positively instead of the negative way that it's usually taught. And if you want to know more about amari, I dealt with it towards the end of the video. I'm going to put over my head and in the information section below. So if you want to follow up amari and its meanings, you can do that after this video. So tsumori is a noun. What is a tsumori? Most sources will tell you that it's an intention, a purpose, a plan. So if we say Tokyo ni iku tsumori da, we're saying I'm planning to go to Tokyo, I'm going to go to Tokyo. Now this of course is true, but what it really means is a fixed state of mind. In this case, we have a fixed state of mind to do something in the future. That's what we have decided will happen in the future. But it can equally refer to something that we have decided happened in the past, what we fixedly believe happened in the past. Now, we can't have a belief about the future because nobody knows what the future is going to be, but we can have a fixed intention about the future, about the past, or about a state that prevails up to this point. We can't have an intention. We can't intend to make something come about that already either did or didn't come about. But we can have a fixed mental state about what it was. So, for example, if we eat a cake, leave the room, come back into the room, and there's the cake sitting on the table, just the way it was before, we can say, Keiki o tabeta tsumori da. I'm certain I ate that cake. And this is how tsumori is used when it's not connected with future events. It expresses a certainty, but it also tends to be expressing that certainty in the face of something contrary to it. So someone is saying that it isn't true, or the evidence of one's eyes is saying that it isn't true, but we retain that certainty that it is true. Now, you won't find this explained in many places, but you might dig out some obscure source that says verb ta plus tsumori means a conviction. Now, this sounds like some magic formula that somehow the past tense plus tsumori magically means a conviction. But as I think we've seen already, that's not really what's happening. And it's not just ta plus tsumori that means a conviction. We can use tsumori with a noun or an adjective that represents how things are at the moment. And it's still going to mean a conviction. It's not going to mean an intention, because we can't bring about something that's already happened, or else not happened, or a state that already prevails, or else doesn't prevail. I'll give an example of this in a minute. But one other thing to note at this point is that there's another thing that might look like a magical rule or a strange formula, but in fact it's also perfectly logical. If we say tsumori da, we're expressing a strong conviction. if we say tsumori datta or deshita, we're wavering in that conviction, and that again is obvious. If I say keki o tabeta tsumori da, I'm saying I'm sure that I ate that cake. Somebody must have come and replaced it or something like that, because I definitely ate it. If we say keki o tabeta tsumori datta, we're putting that into the past tense. I was convinced that I ate that cake, but now that I look at it, maybe I'm not so convinced. So again, this isn't a magical formula. This is a logical construction. Now, unusually for things which indicate a state of mind, we can use tsumori about someone else. So, for example, we might say, ano hito wa tensai no tsumori da, or ano ko wa utsukushii tsumori da. And what we're saying there is that person thinks he's a genius. That girl thinks she's beautiful. In other words, that person has the tsumori of a genius. I don't think he's a genius, but he does. And the reason we can do this is that we're not seriously saying what a person thinks. We're not seriously trying to climb into somebody's mind. It's not like saying that somebody likes something or dislikes something or is afraid of something, which we know we can't do directly in Japanese. We can only say they look as if they're afraid of it. They look as if they like it or appear to dislike it. But in the case of tsumori, precisely because it always implies a negative, we never say tsumori when something is 100% certain. We say it when we're expressing conviction of something that may not be true. In this case, somewhat satirically or critically, we're allowed to make a conjecture about somebody else's internal subjectivity. Now, the next words are hazu and beki, and the main reason they become confusing is that the translations of both into English are identical. They mean should or ought to. And the reason this is confusing is entirely the fault of English, because English uses the terms should or ought to in two quite different senses. And there's nothing in Japanese, and indeed many other languages, that covers both of those senses. So, hazu. What is a hazu? A hazu is a reasonable presumption. So, if we say, Ima Sakura ga koko ni iru hazu da, we're saying Sakura ought to be here now. Now we're not saying it's Sakura's moral duty to be here now. That would be beki. We're saying that, given the facts we know, given the grounds for assumption, we can assume that Sakura is here now. She left at 6 o'clock. It takes an hour to get here. It's now 7:05, so she ought to be here. She should be here. And we can say this whether we know that she's here or not. If we don't know that she's here, we're saying she's probably here. That's what our estimation leads to. If she's not here, if we know that she's not here, we're saying, well, she should have been here. The probability was that she was going to be here, but she isn't. And hazu sometimes gets used in other ways that make it even clearer that it's a noun. For example, when the magic mirror says that Snow White is the fairest in the land, the wicked queen says, Sonna hazu wa nai. Such a hazu does not exist. In other words, such a probability, such a reasonable assumption does not exist. In other words, there's no probability of that. There's no way of reasonably assuming that. It's not true. And this is quite a common expression, Sonna hazu wa nai. Beki, on the other hand, means should or ought to in the sense of moral responsibility. If we say, Benkyou suru beki da, we're saying you should study. That's what you ought to be doing. As opposed to say, Sakura wa benkyou suru hazu da, we're not saying she ought to be studying. We're saying that as far as we know, she's upstairs in her room studying. That's where she went. That's what she said she was going to do. So that's what ought to be the case. Beki is actually the istem of a verb, beku, and as we know, the istem of a verb is always a noun, and I did the video about that, so if you want to take a look at that afterwards, please go ahead. The verb beku is almost never used now, but the rather irregular negative bekarazu is used, and that's using the zu fossilized helper verb, and I covered z and its partner n in the second half of the video. I'll link above and in the information section below. So, bekarazu describes something as being something one should not do. So, shibaku o fumu bekarazu means treading on the grass is not what should be done. Not quite the same as kinshi, which means forbidden, but in practice it comes to much the same thing. So I hope that straightens out these 3 words. And as I said before, if you have other words that are causing you problems, please put them in the comment section below, and I'll try to slate them for videos in the near future. If you have any other questions or comments, of course, you can put those in the comments below as well. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons, my producer angels who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. I'm happy that my Patreon is building into a community where we can share our interest and pursue our adventure into Japanese together. And currently, while the coronavirus crisis lasts, most of my current Patreon is open to the public, so do pop in if you'd like to come. I'm grateful for everybody's support, whether it's financial or otherwise. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. Korekara mo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Class dismissed.